Welcome back. Too many deaths, too many former Bayshore High students with cancer and other illnesses. How could it be a coincidence? The Centers for Disease Control defines a cancer cluster as a greater than expected number of cancer cases that occur within a group of people in a geographic area over a period of time. There have been nearly 500 cases of former Bayshore High students and employees contracting cancer, autoimmune diseases, or having children with birth defects. But in reality, proving a link is not that easy. And joining us for more is Terry Bailey, a Bayshore High graduate, class of '72, who has leukemia. Dr. Scott Hopes, chairman of the Manatee School Board. John Rahillo, a former reporter at the Bradenton Times. And joining us by Skype is attorney Ron Chapman, the healthcare attorney based in Sarasota. And let me start with you, because this is something that you have lived with in the most personal way. When did you become aware that a lot of your former classmates were contracting cancer, and were you aware at the time that you contracted leukemia?
No, I wasn't well, I was aware that I had leukemia at the time, but I didn't know until about 6 months ago. I don't do a lot of social media, and I found it in a newspaper. My father had read about it in a newspaper, and that's when I started getting involved.
What was your initial thought?
Was, wow, I wonder if this is where I got it, because I have leukemia myself.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. They've got a drug, Gleevec right now. The VA is helping me out, and I'm doing really well.
You know, what's really fascinating here, Dr. Hopes, is that you are not only the chairperson of the Manatee School Board, you are by trade an epidemiologist. Yes. You investigate these kinds of things for a living. And you knew that going into the gig. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, as we discussed earlier, I mean, before the governor appointed me, I had sort of done my research, and this issue came up. And many on the board didn't know, but Mr. Colon, who's on the board, does know my clinical background, and felt that, you know, we needed to address it. And it's an interesting observation. As the attorney mentioned, this is a very complex issue, and it's not an easy analysis to do, but finally, the voices have been heard. The county commission, the school board, and the health department have taken it seriously, and we're going to go through the investigation.
Ron, as we said, we define how the Centers for Disease Control defines a cancer cluster. Is there a difference between a medical determination and a legal determination?
Oh, absolutely. But in order to have the legal determination, having the medical determination is a tremendous help. It takes you 50% or more way there if you can determine that it's a cancer cluster. Once you have that determination, then you have to go through the negligence and be able to determine that the proximate cause of whatever the type of cancer is actually can be traced to school. As Dr. Hope said, very, very difficult thing to do because cancers are so different. And it's one of the leading causes of death in people of age that would be graduating or would have been students in Bayshore.
Ron, John, you've been writing about this for years, and it's just my observation that this really has kicked into another gear in terms of an honest investigation into whether or not this cancer cluster exists. Is this a real difference to you in terms of how serious it's being taken?
No, actually, it's more the same old, because I mean, if you look at the study that they put out, they mailed it out to starting at 1984 to current. The majority of the cases that showed up are between 1974 and 1984. Not only that, but what's been excluded, they said at the press conference that what was going to happen is they were going to include the VOTEC school, which I don't need to remind everybody, Mary Cantrell, who was the director there and also on the school board, she died from bone cancer. She had a long battle with bone cancer, and then what they didn't include as well, they said they were going to include those, but they didn't send anything out to the VOTEC.
Obviously, we have a lot more to talk about. We were just getting warmed up, and we'll have more on the Bayshore Cancer Cluster right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the state investigation into whether there is a cancer cluster at the former Bayshore High School. And joining us for more is Terry Bailey, a Bayshore High class member, class of 72. Dr. Scott Hopes, chairman of the Manatee School Board. John Rahillo, a former reporter at the Bradenton Times. And joining us by Skype is attorney Ron Chapman, a healthcare attorney based in Sarasota. We were talking before the break. John was making the point about that you're asking for records, but only going back to what year?
Well, what they're coming from is from 1984 to current. And really, it should go back from 62 to 84.
Right. So Scott, why aren't you asking for records dating back longer than that when there were a lot of other suspected cases?
Well, I think with the health department, first of all, from the perspective of the study, you first look at the data that's most readily available. And so my understanding is our digitized records for the school district of our employees, staff, teachers, and students, the digitized data only goes back to like 1984 and 1985. But keep in mind, that's, a few decades. I mean, so it's not, and I think in this approach, once those cases are reviewed, and if clusters are identified using standard epidemiological methods, that's when you would go and begin looking deeper into the data and look at any cases that show up where they were students in the 60s or the 70s.
Ron, let me ask you, is that how these things are usually investigated?
From the perspective of an epidemiology examination, it is. I mean, the first thing you have to identify is there in fact a cluster? Once you identify the cluster, then you go about identifying what are the potential causes. And if they do that and they come up with some causes after they come up with a cluster, then the issue can go to a court of law. And we will look at it from a negligence point of view, and we would try to determine whether or not that cause was in fact the proximate cause of that cancer. And remember, that's extremely difficult a case to do. I'm not going to say it's impossible. We know of a lot of cases. The Aaron Brockovich story is based upon, a case similar to this. So it can be done, but it's extremely difficult to do, and it should be done.
John, briefly remind us, what do people suspect? I know there were an issue of oil drums. What else was going on in and around the high school?
Well, I have letters from the lawyers of Riverside Products. One example, a mile down the street from the school, back in the 80s, that was actually they were disposing of their liquids, their very toxic liquids, on site. The letter they sent to when Pat Glass was chairman of the board, saying that look at you, all of a sudden we've been disposing of this on site for 7 years, and now you want us to clean it up overnight. They fought for 2 years with these memos back and forth, and they never addressed what any kind of harm. They were arguing over the money, who was going to clean it up.
Ron, let me ask you another question, because a lot of our viewers may have seen, not only with Aaron Brockovich, but there were other movies about suspected cancer clusters. And often when you are dealing with companies that are no longer in business, it makes it so much more difficult, not only to investigate, but in order to litigate.
Well, the investigation is very difficult because you have to have the records and you have to see what they dumped, what they cleaned up, what the studies were at the time. But once you do all that, one of the issues becomes compensation. And of course, once a company has gone out of business, it's very difficult to determine who would be in a position to pay for any damages, any loss of opportunity to have a good life, any loss of fellowship with family members, all of those types of things. So you have two problems when a company is no longer available. Finding the data to determine if in fact they were part of the cause, maybe not the whole cause, but part of it, and then determining whether or not there's any money there to collect.
Terry, when you went to Bayshore High, were you aware of whether it's the oil drums or the company down the street and have any suspicion of any problem?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, you're 16, 17 years old in high school, you're not thinking of environmental concerns.
Cheryl Josa, who has been leading this effort in order to investigate this suspected cancer cluster, says that when she looks at a yearbook. She doesn't see fellow classmates, she sees victims. Have you stopped, looked through your old yearbooks and felt the same way?
You know, I've only been involved in this probably in like the 6 months that I told you about. And the more that I do look through it, I mean, I've got a good buddy, Paul Pazuzza. He's going through chemotherapy right now as we speak. And it's just crazy how it's all working out that way. The more people you talk about, the more that keeps coming up. And I think that's the best part about even doing a show like this, is to get the word out to those people, because the health studies, my 2 kids graduated from Bayshore. They got the health study. I didn't receive the health study. And I'm the one that has the cancer. So there's a lot of people out there that don't know anything about this, and we've got to get the word out too.
Where do you want this to go?
It's just got to be recognized that they need to, I don't know if you go through yearbooks, how you find all these people, and try to contact them. Make sure some of these people, they may not even go to the doctor, you know, and get checked.
Right, but do you want blame assigned? Do you want compensation for you and the other victims?
No, we just don't want anybody else to get affected by it. If it is an environmental concern, we don't want any of the kids that are going there now to be affected by it. And if it was affecting people in the past, we want them to know about it so they can go get treatment. You know, catch it as early as you can.
Doctor, what's the position of the school board? I mean, you're looking at this now. It's from what you described, this is going to be a very long road. How hard are you willing to push to find the ultimate answers here, if those answers are possible?
Oh, look, I mean, there are a number of issues here. I mean, I was appointed by the governor in July. I was elected chairman in November. You see what's occurred since June, July. We're actually doing a study. I mean, I think we too want to know the answers. I mean, I think the people that are affected deserve you know, the level of research that's going into it. The other thing that will come out of this, regardless of this study, the attention is going to all the news is going to get the attention of other researchers. You and I spoke before the segment about some of the studies that I did back when I was first in the College of Medicine.
You have found cancer clusters in various parts of the state.
Early on, using this data in 1983 and 84, and interesting enough, found cancer clusters for a particular type of cancer that was known to be caused by certain environmental factors, and it was 30 years later before they developed the technology to even measure something in the groundwater.
So, John, having heard this, and I know you were not initially satisfied here, do you feel any better that the school board, the health department is going to do what it needs to do?
It can't. Terry was the perfect example. They didn't send him anything. They're missing. It's like shooting for Venus and landing on Mars.
But you know, there's an important point. Okay, go ahead.
Let me finish. Because for one thing, this is going to be over, as the TV said earlier, about at the end of this month, or I mean the end of February, that we're going to conclude this. You can't conclude it. For one thing, there's all the people that went to Votech.
We only have a few seconds.
What's interesting, remember, you don't need to know 100% of the cases. You may not even need to know 30% of the cases in order to have a valid study that results in statistically significant outcomes of whether you have a cluster.
All right, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. Our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And Ron, I'll start with you. What is the one thing you want people to take away from this conversation?
Well, I think the first thing is that the stakeholders seem to be interested. This is a long process in order to determine if there is a cancer cluster. That's just the beginning of the process. Get the word out, get the information. I think the investigators from the Department of Health, you know, they're not interested in a particular outcome. They're interested in the science of it, and I think they will look at the science. And then if there is a cancer cluster, then I think there's time to potentially get attorneys and other folks involved that may be interested in this kind of thing, and see if there is a cause, and if that cause can be attributed, and then go about the cleanup, go about the compensation, go about that that process. But it is a long, very, very difficult process if the end result is to find out where or how these people contracted cancer, and if it can be related to the school to eradicate the problem and get compensation. You're looking at maybe a decade from here before any of that actually happens.
And Terry, what are the one thing you want people watching this to know?
Just like Ron said, we need to get the word out, let people know. You know, not even for the people at Bayshore, maybe for the residents around it if it's an environmental concern. There's people that went to Votech, there's people that live around the school. The Boys Club's been there forever. You know, there's been kids that went there.
Scott, I would imagine that people watching this want to know that the school board is taking this seriously and is dedicated to getting to the bottom of this if possible.
The school board, the county commission, the health department, this is the first step in a valid epidemiological study to begin to understand and evaluate what is being reported among these students, former teachers, and staff. Right. And it will be, and if we have significant findings, we'll continue to follow up these studies.
John, you know, they say that the best disinfectant is light, and at least you have more attention on this now than you did a year ago.
Absolutely, and it's going to happen. It's not going away. But the commission, forget the commission, both the school board and the county commissioners, because I've been hounding them for 3 years. What they've been doing, what they're doing now is they're playing Scrabble with half the letters missing. And they're not going to get to where they think they're.
You know, everybody needs to get their feet held to the fire, and I guess you are the guy.
Well, I'm going to be here in 10 years. You and I are going to be talking about it.
Thanks a lot. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on climate change. We were joined by Dr. Terry Root, who won the Nobel Peace Prize along with Al Gore in 2007 for her research on climate change. And here's what some of you had to say. George says, how can you expect anyone to change their views by saying anyone of intelligence cannot believe that the climate is changing? Jonathan says, so glad we have a Nobel Peace Prize winner in our community to educate us on climate change in plants and animals. Thank you for your words, Dr. Terry Root. And Mary says, global warming is the figment of the liberal imagination. Well, okay. If you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired. Just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Terry Bailey is Bayshore High Class of 72. Dr. Scott Hopes is chairman of the Manatee School Board. John Rahalo is the former reporter at the Bradenton Times, and joining us by Skype, attorney Ron Chapman, a healthcare attorney